Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist Podcast. Hey everybody, I've got some calls that have come in the last few days, so I'm just going to let those roll, and I'll respond to the calls interspersed, and that'll be the episode. So we've got some calls from a few friends, and we'll just get into it. Thank you for listening. Hey BJ, cool to hear you playing Age of Ashes. I'd looked into that one and possibly running it, but we decided on Extinction Curse because of the circus thing. Unfortunately, COVID sort of killed that. We were playing live, and then we had to play, everything closed down, and then we had to play online, and people just kind of said, screw it. So I think a lot of it was, there was a couple people who just could not get the Roll20, and it was frustrating for everyone else, and they said, yeah, let's just stop, because it just wasn't working out, and people weren't showing up. So well, but Extinction Curse, we got, like, I would say 2/3 of the way through the first book, and it's pretty cool. I love the circus mechanic. It seems like in the first level dungeon crawl for all these Pathfinder 2 adventure paths, there's some big monster that can potentially wipe the party unless you're lucky, right? So maybe it's a common theme, common design. Oh, I also didn't ask, are you playing this Pathfinder 2? What platform are you playing? Are you playing just Zoom and Dice? Or are you playing on Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds? I guess I didn't hear what you're doing Age of Ashes on. I think it works pretty well on Fantasy Grounds, but I also did enjoy when we played Hyperborea, and I just said, hey, let's just roll dice or roll on the bot. I don't know, maybe if we continue that again, I'll do a Roll20 for it. But it seems like that was a spontaneous game, although I really would like to get a Hyperborea game regularly going, because I like that. I like the world, I like the adventures, I like the aesthetic, and I want to get, you guys to get some freaking ray guns and flying Atlantean sleds. That would be kind of neat. Hey, Carl. That was Carl Rodriguez of the Geomologist Presents podcast. Yeah, I noticed the common theme too with this and with the Abomination Vaults, where we got kind of a mid-sized town with kind of all your basic needs and a cast of NPCs you can form relationships with, but things eventually lead you to a nearby dungeon that's close enough you can kind of go back and forth to town and explore. And yeah, I felt a lot of commonalities between the two. I mean, not so much that it was boring at all. It was a lot of fun, but I could see those common themes in those. And this is the second adventure path I've done with Pathfinder, so I'm sure that Age of Ashes and Abomination Vaults will differentiate themselves more the longer we progress in those games. So, but we are using Fantasy Grounds for this as well. So it's all familiar to me, having played in Fantasy Grounds in Pathfinder 2 with you for Abomination Vaults. So. Yeah, and I think it's everybody else. We've all played together, and we've all played together in Fantasy Grounds. We've just never all played Pathfinder 2e in Fantasy Grounds. So everybody's still learning the rule set for Pathfinder 2e, and the setup for 2e Pathfinder is deceptively similar to the interface for D&D 5e. So we're having to, why is this not working the way it's supposed to? Oh, that's because this is the Pathfinder rule set, not the D&D rule set. It's not exactly the same. So we're learning the ins and outs of it there. But having a good time with that one. So and of course, as always, having a good time in your Pathfinder game. So with Hyperborea, that was a cool setting. I immediately put that on my list of next time I have a little bit of extra money to put into a new game product, to go ahead and do the backer kit for 3rd edition Hyperborea. I think when I do that, you get go ahead and get the PDFs. I'm hoping so. Is it a backer kit now, or is it technically pre-order? Whatever it is. So I'll get the hardbacks, but can hopefully have the PDFs immediately. Yeah, it did seem like a pretty cool world, and what I liked about it is it's obviously a variant of AD&D, but they changed enough of the classes with the way the terminology they use, the ones they kind of named a little differently. You have a huntsman instead of a ranger. You've got a cataphract instead of a cavalier. Just the way they chose the classes and tweaked them enough and renamed them so that it really reinforces the theme of this is a pulp sword and sorcery world, not a medieval high fantasy world. Which I really, I would love to see other. It would be cool, not to replace Hyperborea, but it would be neat to see other attempts at some of the cool rule sets that are out there for different editions of D&D and Pathfinder and other types of games that would do that. They kind of do the work for you. They reinforce the theme for you because, I don't know. As a DM, you can just say, pretend your fighter is a Myrmidon and pretend your barbarian is a very much a Gaulish or a Germania. You're trying to reinforce some sort of Bronze Age theme, but they're reading the books that D&D presents as is, and for some reason, no matter how much as a DM you tell players that, I think sometimes they default back to thinking of D&D in very Tolkien-esque terms. So it's kind of cool to have a version of it that's just different enough that it kind of pulls you out of that habit or those automatic ways of looking at things. Anyway, yeah, hopefully we can play Hyperborea again. So I would love to get my hand on a ray gun and a sky sled, and then if I could have a bastard sword and a ray gun and a battle axe and a sky sled, I could be He-Man. All I would ask from that point on is to give me a giant green tiger to ride into battle when I can't use my sky sled. Make it happen, Carl. Make it happen.
I guess this is a response to the Buffy talk. Just look up on YouTube Buffy the musical, and that's probably the only episode you need to watch. I love that episode. I've watched it multiple times. I even like the music, Did I buy the soundtrack? No, but I would if I could find it. I probably have it like somewhere on my Amazon music list, I'm sure. But I really enjoyed Buffy the musical. It's a pretty neat storyline that opens up and takes place. Of course, a lot of spin-offs like Angel and others. Well, it kind of makes me want to run ETU more. Too bad that game kind of flopped. Even though maybe they were scared because Amy said she was going to play, and then I don't know. Or it could be just time or people being people. Anyway, Buffy, watch it.
Well, thanks for the advice, Carl. I'll have to check that out when I have some extra time to do that. It sounds like a lot of fun.
Hey, BJ, Jason here. I didn't know Joss Whedon wrote for X-Men. I never got into X-Men like everybody else did, though, so maybe that's why I didn't know that. They weren't one of the comics I really followed. Anyhow, I will talk to you later. Great recaps, and I look forward to playing any game with you soon.
That was Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Yeah, Jason. Joss Whedon. He didn't write a lot of X-Men. It was the I think it was 2003, 2004. He wrote 24 issues. It was this Astonishing X-Men, Volume 3 of the Astonishing X-Men comic book series, issues 1 through 24. That's what he wrote. So he didn't, and he contributed to the early drafts of the scripts of the first X-Men movie. I think before he wrote that. But yeah, if you think of the classic heyday of the X-Men in the 80s, that was all Chris Claremont. Weeden didn't get involved until just for that short run of 24 issues in 2003 to 2004. But he did write in that the storyline, the third X-Men movie, which he didn't. I don't think he took part in the production of that. But the third X-Men movie was, of course, their first attempt at adapting the Dark Phoenix saga, but they interwove it with a second story line about a mutant cure, and that was part of Joss Whedon. That came directly from Joss Whedon's run on Astonishing X-Men. That's that part of the storyline he wrote in the comics, and then they based part of the movie on that. So yeah, he did write X-Men, but he's not. You're thinking of the major contributors to everything X-Men. I don't think he's not up there with the guys like Chris Claremont and Jim Lee and Scott Lobdell and people like that.
Hey, BJ, Jason here. Enjoyed your Westworld episode. I think that's important to do whether you're running a pre-written game or not, pre-written module or not. You need to know your NPCs so you can give believable reactions to what the players do or have them continue in doing what they're going to do. I prefer not to run pre-written modules given the option, but the NPCs are still going to be doing what they would be doing. And, there still may be plots and things going on depending what the characters do. And if the characters interrupt them, then obviously that's going to change how those things, timelines work and whatnot. But yeah, so I don't think it's a pre-written module thing, but I think everything you said is 100% valid, and I think it's great advice. A couple other quick thoughts. Our Talzorian Games, the Cyberpunk, they put out Mike Pondsmith wrote a game in 1992 called Dream Park, based on a 1981, I think, Larry Niven novel, where it's basically LARPing in the future, and then shenanigans and mysteries the party's trying to solve. There's like 4 novels in the series. But so in that RPG, you're effectively playing LARPers, or actually, you're almost close to playing MMOers. It's kind of interesting. It's a cut-down version of the interlock system from Cyberpunk 2020. But of course, because of the problems with IP that we've talked about in the past, you can't buy it anymore because the license is expired. So you have to find it on the used market. I don't know that it's worth the price it commands on the used market, but it's interesting. I guess the last idea that ties in with this stuff would be that of, the morality, and you bring that up. Is it moral? Is it okay to go to a park like Westworld and do whatever you want? I mean, obviously that's what the designers of the park intended you to do, but is that okay? And that brings up the idea of playing an evil character. And I think when you're playing an evil character, be it in an MMO or an RPG, or you go to Westworld and, do all those evil things, that's interesting, because people have also said that, they question the morality of watching, say, horror movies. And I think there's a difference in the I don't know, is there the voyeurism of watching a horror movie or reading a smut novel and actually acting the things out and playing them out? Because I don't think that people that watch horror movies, even your crazy, depraved horror movies or giallos and things that I watch, I watch pretty much everything, but that's not the point. The point is, I don't think that people that watch those things are necessarily depraved people. And there have been studies, and I would have to go cite them, so I'm kind of talking my butt here. But I know I've heard the idea that because people are getting their thrills out through watching them on TV, or getting getting shocked and scared by watching these things on TV, it actually is kind of a healthy release to watch it that way, to experience it that way. Again, you may be able to find the studies quicker than I could, but is that the same thing as actually going to the park and acting it out? I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, Jason, I think there's nothing wrong with being a fan of horror movies and of that genre, or of horror novels. Yeah, I think the question comes when you read a horror novel or you watch a horror movie. You're watching, you're kind of watching or observing or reading a story. if you star as an actor in a play or a movie or a TV show where you're the bad guy, you're playing a role, but you're not really doing those things. You're doing it knowing that there's going to be an audience observe you and your fellow actors tell a story. But when you get into role playing, you're making decisions that you're not following a script. You're not passively absorbing someone else doing something, and you're doing it yourself, but you're not following a script. You're making the decision to do those things, and I think that's where the question starts to go: is that okay? And I think it's. I've had a lot of good friends where I've been in games where they played evil, creepy characters, and they play it to entertain everybody, and it's great. And there's been a couple times I've been at a table where I was really disturbed by the person because I felt like they weren't doing it because they were exploring a way to just have fun playing a role. It really felt like this is just kind of creeping me out. You're getting a little too, you like this. You're enjoying this a little too much. You don't have that wink and nod. There's not that tongue-in-cheek element to it. Would you really treat people this way in the real world if you get away with it? But that's been rare that I've ever experienced that. Not with any of my friends necessarily, but a couple people I've been at some pickup games with, like game stores and stuff like that. But then, it's one thing to sit in a role-playing game at a tabletop where it's all in your imagination and you're just describing things your character does. Take it a step further in an MMO where you're controlling an animated character. It's like Grand Theft Auto. I mean, people get freaked out about the stuff you can do in Grand Theft Auto. But then, I guess what we don't have now, which would be a question of would it cross another line, is now I'm role playing, and I'm making the decisions to engage in these kind of immoral or violent or antisocial behaviors. But the object is still not another person, but it looks like a person, and it feels like a person, and it reacts like a person, and it would be indistinguishable from a person if someone hadn't told me, hey, that's just an animatronic. That's just an android. It doesn't have, it's not a person. There's no sentience there. Which, the story in Westworld is you come to find out the androids do develop sentience, and then you think, well, do you really hold the people who've been mistreating them up to the point that we realize that accountable, or they didn't know they were doing anything wrong? They didn't know they were hurting effectively a person, even though it's an artificial intelligence. But assuming that the androids aren't sentient, they are just machines that they're following their programming. There's just one step closer to the reality. Would you, in D&D, would you murder somebody over at the edge of town when nobody was looking and take all their money? You might, depending on the kind of character you're playing. If you're in an MMO video game, it's more like a virtual reality. Would you do that? Again, you're controlling a joystick or some buttons on a game controller. If you had to physically walk up and plunge a knife into the back of something that looked and acted human, even though kind of on some level, even though you logically know it's not, or put a gun to its head and pull the trigger, even though it's all made up and that's not real money, and you can go spend it at the saloon in Westworld and get drunk, or have a meal or whatever, but you can't carry that money out into the real world, But still, you gotta physically do it. You gotta engage in it, and it's not a prop knife. It's not it is a prop knife and a prop gun, but it's indistinguishable from reality, except that you just know it's a simulated reality. I don't know. I mean, we really couldn't truly answer that question until we get to the point that we have sophisticated technology to actually do it. But, you can see the kind of progression I'm talking about there. So it's an interesting question, and I'm sure lots of people are going to have lots of different opinions on it. But yeah, but I'll have to if I get a chance, I'll have to check out the novel you mentioned. So thanks for the calls. I appreciate it. Take care.
Hey, BJ, Daniel from Bandits Keep calling in. Great episode about Westworld style, I guess, LARPing. um, yeah, I think that is amazingly good advice and exactly how I run the game when I'm running a campaign. What I generally do is I have a list of like events or people, and just in a notebook, essentially. And then after each session, I will just sit down and I'll just write next to that person where they currently are, like what's happening. So, like, let's say you've got a plot where bandits are robbing people and they've got a reason. They're trying to collect enough gold to, I don't know, raise back from the dead lich. I don't know why they do that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to track how much gold they're getting, and then if they don't get stopped, eventually that lich is going to be raised, and then that'll start a whole new thing. So that's exactly how I do it. I think it's really great advice and awesome episode.
Daniel Norton of the Bandits Keep. Thank you, Daniel, for the call as always. Yeah, I think that's a good. Exactly. Yeah, it's a perfect example of what I was talking about. Just keeping some little notes to yourself about what's going on, and then if the players ever come back around to encounter the consequences of that choice or that lack of choice or whatever they did, that's good for your world building. To I think it really makes the world feel real when they realize, hey, things kind of went on without us when we went off in the other direction. So, thanks again for the call. Talk to you later.
Hey, BJ, thanks for reminding me. I think I stopped at the end of season 2 and was getting on to season 3, and then I haven't watched it, even though we have HBO Max. It's just hard. We have one TV, and we share it, and usually we watch what Amy wants to watch. So, yeah, I got to get back to that and check out the Westworld. I also liked how they had not just like Westworld, but other worlds too, when kind of in the expanded universe, which I thought was kind of neat. So anyway, thanks for talking about this. It's pretty cool. Hey, BJ, if the NPCs do something without the players being there, isn't that delving into a story game? I thought Emergent was it only happens if the players dictate what happens. So I agree. I think it's a great idea to have motivations for the NPCs and the story continues despite what the players do. But how many times have you sat at the table when the GM asks, okay, what do you do now? Well, I don't know. What does the story tell us to do? I mean, it's kind of a weird thing. Sometimes players don't want to take the action or do the thing. So then what do? You have the story play out in the background like you just suggested. I think that's a great idea. And I don't know. It's very interesting. Yeah, I think it's a very cool thing about RPGs is that the players can influence the story and change the way things might happen. But I think I play with players also who enjoy that and like that and kind of get into that feeling of interacting with the world and making choices and making decisions. And then there's other players who just try to say, well, are we supposed to go this way? What is the story? What does the story tell us? But there really is no story for the most part unless you create the story. Yes, there might have been things that happened that you have to find out about. But, I guess that's the importance of putting down clues and laying things down, but then ultimately it's the player's decision to do things or not. Instead of trying to pick apart what we should do next, just make a decision.
Yeah, I think that's an error a lot of players make of saying, what are we supposed to do? And, when you're playing rather linear adventures, sometimes you get in the habit of doing that. Because, even pre-published, adventure paths are a big deal. Pathfinder has its adventure paths, and D&D has its these big meta adventures that take you from first to 12th or 13th level. and that's kind of what are marketed right now for the pre-published adventures, at least in the kind of contemporary games. And players kind of know there's some kind of big finale at the back of that book, and they got to get there. They get the sense, even if they don't know what it is, they got a sense of that they've got to get there. And some of those things are pretty linearly and almost pretty linearly, pretty linear, and some of them allow a little more sandbox. And finding the balance there can be hard. Particularly if you've not DM'd or ran a lot of them. So that's I know for me, my earliest DMing was making up my own adventures, and so then you get busy. You only have once every week or two to play with people. You want to cut down on prep. You think, I'll just buy the adventure. And you read through it, and then I'll just run the adventure, and I don't have to make everything up. But it can be real easy when you do that to just for the DM to set the adventure on rails and almost telegraph to the players there's a right choice here. And I've had to break myself of that and get back to deconstructing the adventures and making them my own and being flexible and things like that. And I think I'll talk about that. I think that is something that's going to be a topic for my 100th episode next week. Is about making things your own, so that it fits for you and the kind of game you want to run, and ways to think about doing that. I think that's going to be the major topic coming up here on my 100th/1 year anniversary episode in a few days. But yeah, I think you're making some really good points there. As far as this being a story game, yeah. What does that mean, a story game? I mean, I think we know. I think we're talking about a true story game as a game that's designed to build a story versus kind of classic role-playing games are designed to play a game and a story emerges from the gameplay. But it really only becomes a story when the game ends and everybody sits around and talks about what happened and tells their friends the next day. Or you recap what happened last time as you prep for the next session. That's the story. In the moment playing the game, you're playing the game, and then the story kind of comes out of it. To quote or to paraphrase Matthew Colville, I think he's the first person I ever heard actually put it in those terms. But I don't know that having an idea of what happened when the players left town, so that when they come back something's a little different. I don't know if that's makes it a story game, or if that just makes it more of a living sandboxy campaign setting where your choices have consequences. One, it's just interesting, the passage of time. I mean, it makes the world a little more immersive and gives them players more things to interact with and riff off of and maybe improvise on when you left town, you come back and there's a wedding going on. Well, but that could mean nothing. That has nothing in terms of experience points or treasure or leveling up. It's just some NPCs are doing what NPCs do, and you might get some spontaneous role playing and some ideas for adventures or stuff just by having them interact with, hey, what's going on? Who's getting married? But I was thinking more really last time about what happens when, you say the adventurers are passing through town and there's a potential quest giver there, and they kind of don't bite on it. They say, no, we've already got something else that we're supposed to take care of, and we're not really interested in that. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that quest goes unfulfilled? Is it just waiting for them if they come back and it's still available? For how long? And then what if this old man that wants you to go, rescue his grandchildren from the bandits? What happens later? I mean, if they don't do that, and like I said before, does a group of NPC adventurers do it and get the glory, and now they've got rivals, for every job that comes up? Or does the old man go and do it himself and get himself killed, and they come back and discover not a wedding but a funeral? Or, or do the kids join the bandits? And you find out later, much later, that now these teenage bandits that you could have put on a right path. Maybe that's not interesting to some people, but that's the kind of things I was thinking about. Is that when you choose one path, that means you've chosen not chosen another. And if you could run your campaign world in a way that it's kind of a living world where there's a consequence for every those choices either way, and you make note of the interesting ones that happen because they can come back later to just sort of reinforce this as a living, breathing world where time passes and things change. Is that a story game? I don't know. As much as I like the gamey aspects of D&D, and I think we can get bogged down too much into, weeping and gnashing of teeth and pulling at our hair over, was that meta? We don't want a meta game. We don't want to get, we don't want to get, we don't want to turn a fantasy adventure game or a role-playing game into a storytelling game. It does get kind of boring if there's not at least some storytelling that comes out of it, even if it's more emergent, right? To just completely say, well, we're not going to. This is in no way, absolutely, shape or form a storytelling game. I think the games can be kind of boring if there's not some element of that. It doesn't have to. You don't have to be heavy-handed or really rich, because some people would just like a casual game where they don't have to think about that. They don't have to follow complex plots and campaign world lore and history and things like that. That's fine. But if you got players who do engage with that stuff and do like it, it's cool to kind of keep that world moving along, regardless of what they, not regardless of what they do. It moves along with what they do. And, they can affect some things, and the things they choose not to interact with grow and change and develop in a different way. So at this point, I'm rambling, so it's time to stop the episode. I want to thank everybody for listening, and I want to thank Carl Rodriguez and Jason Connerly and Daniel Norton for their calls, and zeroing in on 100. You guys have any suggestions or shout-outs for episode 100, 1-year anniversary? You got a few days to get them into me, so take care out there, and I'll be back later. And that's it for this episode of The Arcane Alienist. I want to thank Dave Bone for the cover art that I use for the episodes. Check out ironseer.com. And the music is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. Thank you for listening. Give me a call sometime through the Anchor app or at the Anchor website. And I'll be back in the future with another episode.